Welcome to Kings of Kimuras, your one-stop podcast for everything from mats to the stars. Join us as we dive into the heart of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, explore the thrills of MMA, and groove to the beats of music. But that's not all. We're also venturing into the unknown, discussing aliens and the mysteries of the cosmos. And of course, we'll be shooting the breeze, sharing stories, and laughs along the way. Get ready for a wild ride from a universe of topics. Strap in and prepare to explore the world of BJJ, MMA, music, aliens, and more. Let's roll.
All right, guys, welcome to Kings of Kimuras podcast. I'm Tony Trammell, and I'm here today with...
I'm Tyler Larkin, Tony Trammell Purple Belt.
So, again, this is going to be our fourth episode. Our third episode is not out yet, just released number 2. Make sure you guys are listening on all platforms. We're on iTunes, Spotify, video is on YouTube, and I want to give a shout out to Edgar with Ear Ones. Now we have a second camera angle. Moving up in the world, guys. So
technically fifth episode.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we filmed several episodes that like never made it because there were so many errors. But it is what it is. You know, like the longer you do something, just like anything, you get better at doing it. So. I
mean, you look at Rogan's first few podcasts.
Yeah,
they were a disaster.
I watched some of those, and it was kind of like they had like snowflakes on the screen. Yeah. So I was one of those guys in the early days that I was on the Rogan board. I don't know if you were on the message board or not, but he had like it was a really cool message board, and some of the coolest things were like guys that were really good at Photoshop. There's a guy named Photoshop Steve that has an Instagram account now, and he like moved all of that there, but they did away with the message board because of things that were happening like in the Trump administration with if you it was like Backpage, remember when everybody got arrested because they had human trafficking on there. So to avoid any issues, you know, you don't know what guys are putting on message boards.
I think I started listening to that. I had a roommate. I lived in San Pedro, California. I had a roommate who used to he worked on the docks, the ILWU, and like he would drive the big cranes, and all he would do was listen to the Rogan podcast. He was like, you should listen to this.
Yeah. I think if you have a job like that, you know, it's probably more beneficial to listen to podcasts and learn something than like listen to the radio all day.
Yeah, Pete was out there, you know. He was like the alien portion of this podcast.
I gotcha.
He would get all over it.
So let's give a little bit of background of who you are. Like, obviously, you train jiu-jitsu, but like, where did you grow up? Where are you from?
Yeah, I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, so I don't tell many Texans that. You know, moved to Texas in 2017, lived in Austin for a while. But yeah, grew up in LA. I was born and raised in Long Beach, lived all over Montana, New York, all over Southern California. You know, I've got quite a story. You know, I always kind of introduce myself as I'm Tyler. I'm an alcoholic. Next week, I actually celebrate 11 years of sobriety.
Nice, man. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. So I've had quite a wild ride to get here, but you know, I started training jiu-jitsu in 2008 after I got jumped at the University of Arizona, and I realized I didn't know how to defend myself. And I was kind of going through it. One of my best friends, who actually introduced me to my wife, was like, move back to LA, like we'll get you a job and get you focused. And he took me to Hickson Gracie's Academy in West LA.
Nice.
Yeah.
What year was that?
That was 2008. Yeah, it was summer 2008. So I trained there, and it's funny. Like I've been on a couple podcasts. I've talked about it, but you know, it's there's a couple guys there. So my buddy Alex Payne introduced me. Our other buddy Mo Summers, his dad was Andy Summers, the lead guitarist of the Police. Yeah, so we all kind of trained. Mo was a blue belt. Alex and I were white belts. But a bunch of the there's like the Crone Gracie Sicarios. So like all of his black belts now. They were all blue belts when I started. So in particular, there's a guy, he goes by Death Burka, Nick Frost. And he's nasty. He's a nasty black belt. But yeah, I trained there for about a year and a half. And then I broke my back rolling with a black belt in judo. And then I didn't train for like a decade. You know, I was just between like drugs and alcohol and everything. Like in 2019, I got back into it. And once I got back into it, it was just like nonstop. I haven't, you know, training in kitchens during COVID on the floor and, you know, just whatever I could do to train. And, you know, obviously now, like, I travel so much for work and, you know, I get to train, like, all over the country and see gyms everywhere.
What was it like in the Hickson Gracie Academy? Because at that time, where you were like, everybody was a blue belt. Guys that were blue belt back then were blue belts for like 5-6 years. And, like, their belt would be coming apart. I feel like blue belts back then would be like the equivalent of like a purple belt today. And I don't mean like technique wise, but like time wise.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, so it's funny because growing up, I grew up in an area of Southern California called Palos Verdes. So I was a stone's throw from the Gracie University. So, you know, Crone and Hickson. So this was after Hoxton had passed away. And Hickson kind of absolved himself of competition. He had gone through the divorce. So he'd moved back to Brazil. So really Crone was running the school.
Yeah.
And Hickson would come, you know, he would come and do seminars. And I always tell people it's so funny. He would show like 30 minutes of technique and an hour and a half of breathing. Like that vacuum breathing he did.
I've been to a seminar with him. And on one hand, it was like it was weird. It was like very surreal meeting this guy. I mean, it was when he walked in the room, it was like everybody erupted in clapping and applause. And that's, you know, it was weird because there's like 250 people and like everybody's, and I got caught up in it as well. And like I did something weird where I did a selfie with him.
What do I do with my hands?
I took a selfie with him like in front of all these people, and I look back on it like, God, man. I was like, I was already a black belt at that point. This guy's, you know, one of my jiu-jitsu heroes, and like here I am getting to meet him.
But yeah, like going back to the blue belts, I mean, you know, so it was interesting because Crone was like very enmeshed in the skate culture, and like Santa Monica is weird because it's divided by this little valley where all the movie stars live, and then it's the Palisades. So Crone lived in the Palisades, and the Palisades kids were like they were influenced by the Venice gang culture. So like even though they were white kids, they were all like tatted skateboarders, like, you know, kind of against the man. So they were tough kids. And Hickson's very much what you're saying, where it was like, you know, that was around the time where the Gracie University was like, if you know these 30 techniques, then you get your blue belt, right? Like it was so, I mean, nowadays they make fun of people who have the online school and you can get your blue belt online. So back then it was like you had to earn it, right? And it was the old school, you know, kind of how Hoist is, where it's like, they vetted you, right? And they like interviewed you. They interviewed your friends, your family, and were like, is this person a black belt? But they would do it for lower level belts. And I think like with Crone, the average black belt is a 15-year black belt, right? Like, so it's like, you can imagine how long each belt is for each individual. And I think back then too, it was so much different than it is now in terms of like the pace at which people excel, right? You got like, you know, Boogie and Gio got their black belts in 5 years. You've got like Gordon got his in 5 years. Yeah. And so it's like, I think it's different, but it's also like,
I think it also depends on who you get the belt from, you know? Because I still think that if you went to Hickson Gracie today and let's say he had an academy where he's teaching, I don't care how good at breakdancing you are, you're not going to get,
absolutely.
Like and I agree with you in the aspect of it's so much easier to learn as a student today because the amount of access of technology, you know, has brought techniques to everybody.
Yeah.
But when you train under like those Gracie guys, the original guys, they do not teach you any, like, you're not going to learn Berimbolo, you know, you're not going to learn De La Riva.
And that's what I was going to say. I think the other big difference is that so much of what we learned at Hickson's Academy was truly applicable in a street fight. Like they were intentionally teaching you defense tactics through jiu-jitsu, whereas like now so much of jiu-jitsu is like competition focused, but that old school. And I actually, one of my best friends growing up, Rachel Emerson, her dad owns Emerson Knives, and Hoist's first academy is in the Emerson Knives manufacturing plant in Lomita. So I've met him, and it's the same thing. Like, all of their techniques and everything that they do, even today, are derived around that, like, the true self-defense. Like, they don't use any of the flashy bullshit, because they're like, no, like, you need to know how to defend yourself, and you need to know how to give that to people at black belt. It can't just be like, oh, I won, no-gi worlds, or I won gi worlds. Like, it's got to be.
It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
I trained originally under Helson, and he was like a big emphasis on self-defense and street fighting, because when he grew up in Brazil, like, that was his hobby, was street fighting.
Right.
Like, I heard so many stories about taking kids from the kids class and, like, finding a group of people to beat up and rob.
Yeah.
And
It's like,
that's just how it was. And for me, it was, when I started jiu-jitsu, I'm like, oh shit, I want to learn from the source, like, that's a big thing that they would use a lot. And then as you progress in jiu-jitsu, you're like, oh, there's actually more moves than just this. And while I do believe that Gracie Jiu-Jitsu as a brand is like a solid, you're getting, something really solid as a product, Jiu-Jitsu has evolved so much past that.
Totally.
And there's nothing wrong with learning those moves. And if you want, traditional Jiu-Jitsu, I suggest go to like a Gracie school. But if you just want to learn Jiu-Jitsu, like, it's
totally.
You could really be your own coach.
Yeah, I think too, like, the thing that's so interesting, like, if you watch Choke, the documentary on Rickson, they talk about this, but the dynamic of Vale Tudo in Brazil created, I mean, that really came from that, like, street fighting, like, gate crashing, or what do they call it? The gym crashing, or
the Gracie challenges.
The Gracie challenges, right? And so, and there's that story of the kid who one of the Gracie brothers got jumped, and then Rickson showed up to the beach and beat the crap out of the guy.
But you can
beach.
find that video too.
Yeah.
Like, it kind of picks up like halfway through the fight, but the guy that he fought was like a Vale Tudo guy, right? And it was a legit solid fight back and forth.
Yeah, and it's funny because you look at it's so much of what I think, what do they say? Rickson's record is 365-0 or whatever. And the story always is like, he was making so much money in Pride that when the UFC approached him, he was like, you can't afford me, take my younger brother Hoist, and that's how Hoist got onto the scene. So it's like,
when Helson was my coach, they used to say he was like 800-0. Like, how many guys are you fighting at one time? I was like trying to calculate the amount of fights that he would have to have.
And it's like, how many of those fights were street fights that your brother were there? If your brothers were there to be like, hey, there's one.
It'd have to be stuff like that where you're fighting, like, they're counting their record as the street fights that they had where people had no experience. And it's almost like a boxer where a guy's like 49-0 before he ever fights somebody solid.
Or most of the Dagestani records.
I did see, you can get this old video called Gracie in Action. And when I trained under Helson, one of the gyms that I trained at had that video, and they would like play it all the time. And it showed all the other Gracie brothers in this video, and Horian was like doing the commentary on it, where they would like, the guy comes at them, they shoot a double leg, they take the guy down. Well, when it was Helson's turn, he comes at the guy like throwing haymakers, and when the guy tries to counter him, he picks him up and slams him. And he gets on the mount, and then he just starts punching the guy repeatedly until the guy throws his arms up to defend himself, and then he armbarred him.
Right.
And he was the only guy that I saw that was like crazy like that. And I started hearing some of the stories of his life, and it's like, I understand why he's an adult like this.
Well, I mean, the true Gracie tactics in action. It was like, that's like the you remember in Pride they had the you can find it online, like on YouTube, but it was the Gracie demonstration. I think it was Hoist and Rickson.
Yes.
And they like do it in the gi, and then they pick up weapons, and like Rickson showing the technique as Hoist comes to attack him. So like, just going back to the difference, I think, again, it's like the combative nature of jiu-jitsu is really like meant off of like, Helio's need to defend himself against larger opponents. And that's so much of the difference of some of the jiu-jitsu you see today. And you're right. Like, I mean, I'm a big believer that and you know, I'm sure we'll get into it, but the dynamic of the split of like the hobbyist and the like Dom is such an incredible competitor. But it's like understanding where you want to be, right? Like, what do you want from jiu-jitsu? You know, and I tell people all the time, like, for me, it's almost meditative because of, you know, my professional life. I'm so busy, and like, this is the place where I get that 2 hours of meditation of nobody can bother me. I can't pick up my phone. I can't do anything, you know, and I've come to accept that. But you know, like you're saying, if you want that like true blue Gracie technique, you know, go find it, but don't expect to do no-gi.
There's still a lot of guys, you know, that prefer that method, and I think that's okay. You just have to find out what's good for you. And you know, we have people come in here all the time that try a class, and I always say like, hey, try another gym out, you know, like, sure, I'd love to have everybody sign up, but the reality is like, we're not for everybody. And I would rather somebody not have a bad experience training here and go somewhere else and be happy from the start, instead of like train here and they're like, oh, jiu-jitsu's not for me. Like, yeah,
I think though, like something that's really good about you in general is you know, you're very supportive of cross training and getting out of the gym too, even when, you know, being an athlete under you, you know, you're like, no, go get looks. And like our open mat here is so welcoming to like so many people that come and give our, like, both our hobbyists and our competitor level people get great looks at the gym. But I think it's also, you know, and we've talked about it in the past of like, you know, you had coaches and I've had coaches that are like, why aren't you here? You know, why aren't you training at this gym? This is your home gym. You should be here. And it's like, you know, there's a component of that though that I think is so beneficial, especially for me, because innately my career has forced me to find jiu-jitsu in other places, but that acceleration it's provided in my, you know, in the 4 years that or 5 now that I've been dedicated to jiu-jitsu, I think some of my greatest leaps and bounds have been, you know, being able to go to other gyms and then come home and like bring those techniques and try different things. And, you know, I think that's something in this new age of jiu-jitsu that's so beneficial, is that people are willing to go. Like Dom goes to B team all the time, you know what I mean? And he always comes back with these tidbits and like these little things. And it's cool too, because like the B team guys now know us. Yeah. They know like when we come from Corvo. And another gym that's like super important to me in my development is 10 Planet Chicago, Josh Bassini. And his guys have come here. He's had a couple of his black belts have come here. Yeah. And then his guys go to B team too, and they have that dynamic. But you know, it's, you know, I think going back to like, maybe this isn't the right gym for everybody, but I think being open-minded to, you know, experiencing all different types of jiu-jitsu, whether it's that like rigid, and that's part of the reason I'm trying to get back into the gi, because I think there's such a profound aspect of that game. And I think it was the first episode you and Dom talked about it was the second one. You were talking about one of the competitors that won No-Gi Worlds. He won trials, and then he was in European gi. Yeah. And Dom was like, I have always known him as a gi guy. And then he went and then you guys were talking about that dynamic of translation from the gi. Like if you know gi techniques, you should be able to apply them in no-gi.
Yeah, it's relatively easy to cross over. You know, I've like switched up even some of our kids' classes because I feel like, you know, not only is the sport kind of like leading more towards no-gi, but like you need to be proficient in both. Yeah. And as somebody that, you know, I started jiu-jitsu in an MMA school and then progressed to a gi school, which was a Gracie school. And then I trained, you know, primarily in the gi for a long time, man, until I was like a brown belt. And then I started really focusing again. It's not that I didn't train no gi, but like if I looked at all the competitions I did, it was all in a gi. Mm-hmm. I think that it's, you know, you're just looking at how to hold a grip, right? How to break a grip. I mean, all these things are relatively same. You know, there's some things that are not allowed if we look like rule wise, but for the most part, it's still jiu-jitsu.
Right. You know? Right. How do you feel about the IBJJF changing the rules on like gi leg entanglements?
The no-gi leg entanglements? Yeah. So I think it's a good thing, but the problem that we have is that they've developed this rule set for years that is counterintuitive for these guys to be successful, right? When I say these guys, I mean Brazilian guys. Right. because they've grown up in this rule set of you can only do these set of moves. You can only do these set of submissions. And we saw it in the first year, like a lot of these guys get hurt really bad,
Right.
you know, not understanding how catastrophic some of these breaks can happen.
Yeah.
I remember particularly I saw a guy in the brown belt division and he got heel hooked. I think it was like a backside 50-50 and the guy bridged and broke his leg in two places. And he, you know, had plenty of time to tap, but I don't think he realized like the potential for injury that was there, you know. And
Right.
And I don't know how you get past that with the rule set that they have, because we're allowing up to purple belt to only do a straight ankle lock.
Right.
And I'm not saying like, yeah, open up heel hooks for white belts, but there's got to be something else, some other type of way that they can do that. But I feel like because they opened up the rule set to open these different leg locks and leg entanglements and reaps, that it will save them in the long run, but it will also prevent a lot of guys from wanting to compete in it.
Yeah.
You know? And I've had the conversation with, like, I think at least at Master 1, they should allow all of the leg locks that they allow for adult, just give the guys 5 minutes. But people are hesitant on that. And like what I've surmised is that a lot of these guys that are older grew up in this rule set of like, I don't tap to leg locks. And so they're more protecting those guys, maybe, you know, and this is just what I think. I think they're like protecting those guys and their legacy from, you know, not getting destroyed by some dude that like came off the couch and did a leg lock on him.
I mean, I think too, going back to like the Gracies, I think there's a component of like an archaic understanding, because like when I trained with Hickson and Crone, you weren't allowed to touch legs until you were a purple belt. And that was pretty common in the like Gracie school, at least like when I started.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's different now, but I feel like that is like a legacy kind of like Brazilian thing.
I don't know I honestly don't know like how they operate now, but I think the mindset behind it is like, it's too dangerous.
Yeah.
Right. And it can be for sure, you know, like I see some guys like doing some reaping stuff sometimes, and like they don't understand what's happening, you know, both as an attacker and a defender. But you have to help people understand like the knees are designed to work in certain ways, right? And if you can understand body mechanics, you can understand how to not hurt somebody.
Right. I mean, it's a sport of that though, right?
It is, but I think it, you know, in training at least, the idea is like, you know, not injure my training partner. Like obviously I want to get to the submission. And this happens with me sometimes when I'm, you know, I roll with somebody and they don't understand heel hooks or something, and you'll get to like a backside 50-50 and they just don't realize it. And for me, like it's no fun to catch it and then like have to let it go. So sometimes I just don't even attack on people that I know that don't know.
Right.
You know, I'd rather get to their back and choke them. And like, for sure, you understand what that means.
Yeah. So something that, you know, I'm obviously, you know, I when I got back into jiu-jitsu in 2019, I joined 10 Planet. So I trained at 10 Planet Denver, 10 Planet headquarters. You know, and it's funny because I think that one thing that helped 10 Planet in the mid 2000s was EBI, right? And then one of the things that really exploded as a result of EBI was leg locks because of Eddie Cummings, right? He went in there and he just destroyed people. And obviously he was like there's a lot of, call it folklore around Danaher coming up with them, or Eddie really taking advantage of him, Danaher picking it up. But, you know, there was that era of leg locks almost from like 2011 to like 2019. And I think Gordon in 2019 ADCC proved, because, you know, everybody was like, he's just a leg locker, and he was like, I'm going to go out and not leg lock anyone, and he won, right? And it's almost like that was a pivotal moment where it's like everybody learned how important learning defense and attack of leg locks was, and now there's this like next evolution almost happening. And I tell the story of you know, I've gone way down the rabbit hole on the history of jiu-jitsu, right? So like, it really comes from samurai combative techniques, right? Small dudes, 100 pounds of armor, trying to find the weaknesses in the armor, but also like the judo techniques come from like how do you throw someone that's so heavy. And I've I kind of feel like there's a, the story is feudal Japan warred with Imperial Japan. America told Imperial Japan, you need a sport. We have baseball. They were like, baseball sucks. We're going to come up with judo as our national sport. And so like jiu-jitsu recessed to the mountains for a while until Maeda came out and started like sharing it with the world. But it's almost like that diversion that happened almost 200 years ago is like coming back to post 2019. It's like American wrestling, judo, samba is becoming these components that are so necessary in jiu-jitsu. And I was even rolling today, and it's like, I remember I got into jiu-jitsu to do jiu-jitsu, but now you got to know how to wrestle, right?
Yeah, you got to know a lot of different aspects.
And if you don't know that, but I think like 10 years ago, it was like, you better start figuring out leg locks if you're going to be a competitor, or else you're going to get your, what pushed in. And I think that's like why you see some of these young wrestling kids come in, and I mean, they're white belts, but they could probably be blue belts right off the bat because they're just.
I think that honestly, if we're looking at like from a combat sports background, they always say the best is wrestling for MMA, and I think it's the same thing for jiu-jitsu. If you can have somebody that, let's say they didn't know jiu-jitsu before, they don't know judo, but they've had wrestling, that's a pretty solid background. I would take that and be able to build a competitive athlete over somebody that only did jiu-jitsu. Like I'm somebody that only did jiu-jitsu, and I was very much a guard player. You know? And that's because like at that time of jiu-jitsu, right, everybody played guard. There was nobody fighting for takedowns.
Right.
And now with the breakthrough of ADCC, you have to be a solid wrestler, in order to do well. I mean, let's say you're not able to submit the guy. You go to overtime, it is wrestling.
Right. Yeah, I think for me it's similar, but mine comes from my bad back. Like breaking my back. I've always tried to play a defensive game, just to protect myself. So I play a big guard game, but now it's like I'm trying to figure out the wrestling because I feel like it's such an important component if you don't know it. Yeah. You look at people like Dom, I mean, even if you get on his leg, his ability to defend with wrestling is incredible.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Hi, guys. It's your favorite uncle here, Tony Trammell. I just wanted to tell you guys that we're going to be having a grand opening seminar on March 31st with Justin J. Flo Flores. If you're asking yourself, why would I be interested in going that? Well, because you probably suck at jiu-jitsu or judo or wrestling, and this is going to improve your game immensely. Make sure you click the link down below to get registered. If you don't have that link, it's corvoma.com. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, we're back. So we were just kind of talking about, obviously, the, background of you and jiu-jitsu and,
Yeah, no, so one thing I wrote down on some topics when you asked me, listening to the Kings and Kimuras, it's like so informative, but something I was like, how do you, as a black belt, and then Dom is such a high level brown belt, what do you guys suggest for like lower level, like new entrants, right? White belts, blue belts, even new purple belts. Like, what do you suggest that they look at when watching competitions? Because sometimes it can seem a little bit overwhelming, right? Like you don't understand the fundamentals quite as much as like you guys are looking for. So like, what would your suggestion to newer, guys that are watching all these? I mean, there's such an overwhelming amount of content now. So it's like, where do you start?
I think like if you were gonna watch competition to like learn, what I always say is like pick out an athlete that you kind of like their style, and then watch a few videos of them, and you'll start to kind of understand their game. And then like, if we're thinking about like learning techniques, but if you're looking at like, how do I understand what's happening in a jiu-jitsu match, man, that is like, that's a can of worms because there's so much happening sometimes. And I've heard from wrestlers, they're like, man, the jiu-jitsu rules are so much harder than wrestling because to score in ADCC, you physically have to hold the guy flat on his back.
Right.
So, I think that competition videos are some of my favorite things to watch and to learn from. One, because it's exciting to watch competition, but at the same time, you're seeing what the guys at the highest level are doing and what works and what doesn't. You know, you can buy a DVD from a guy and he shows you, 50 moves, and then you watch him in competition. He doesn't do any of that stuff because he's selling DVDs. Right. So I've had, and I do watch instructionals, but if I'm looking at like, what do I want to pick up on, I always try to watch comp first. And then if there's a particular, not technique, but a particular position that I want to learn more from, then I'll buy an instructional on that.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I remember when I was first getting back, I was a white belt in Denver. And, obviously in 2008, when I first started training, there weren't as many instructional, like it was books. Like you talked to Dom in the first podcast about books. I remember Eddie Bravo's Mastering whatever the book was.
Yeah, like Entering the System.
Yeah, Entering this. Yeah.
And I had that one too.
Yeah. But when I got back, it's like BJJ Fanatics had exploded over 10 years, right? And I got, I paid for the Danaher DVD, the back attack system. And I remember, like, it's super informative, but it's so in-depth.
Yeah.
So one thing I did, because I was like, where do I even start with this, is like focus on one thing, right? And I still, like now as a purple belt, like on the way to class, I'll be like, I'm going to work on this one thing. Like I'm going to figure out how to create the dilemma to attack this one thing. But as a white belt, like I had a pretty nasty back game just because of that DVD, because I would like do one thing, right? And I guess that's good advice, right? It's just like focus on that one thing. Like,
yeah, I tell most white belts, they're like, what should I be focused on? Like, man, focus on like learning how to defend yourself, because that's really what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes for me, like when I roll with people that are lower belt than me, but still like high enough that they put me in danger, I'll like only do defensive stuff, because I enjoy that. And it sounds weird to say that. It's like, no, you'd rather be the guy tapping but sometimes, man, it's just really fun to like work your defense. And that's a big aspect of jiu-jitsu that some people overlook. Sure, you want to like, the goal is to like tap the other person, but if we're thinking of like progressing and learning, there's so many other things you could do. You could only focus on like when somebody sweeps you, of like looking for counters, or only sweeping them, or only triangling. You can set your training up in a way that is conducive to getting better in all aspects.
Well, that brings me to something else I was going to touch on. So Mullet John on our team, I was rolling with him and I've been watching and rolling with him for a while, but I was rolling with him this week, and he's got an incredible leg game. He knows how to attack. And I realized when I was rolling with him, his thing, which I think is applicable to a lot of people in jiu-jitsu, is that there's a gap from defense to attack to defense, right? And Danaher talks about this, where it's like, the attack system for New Wave comes from the defense, right? How do they defend to gain the confidence to attack, knowing if it fails, they know how to defend. And I think like for a lot of kind of that blue to purple belt level is the willingness to take the risk, knowing you're going to be safe because you know how to defend.
Yeah.
Right. And I was talking to John about that because after rolling with him for like 6 months, I was like, I think the gap for you is when you go from attack to defense.
Yeah.
Because he knows how to defend really well. He's got a nasty half guard game. He'll get it in under your legs, and like you'll be in trouble if you don't immediately try to defend against him.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes if he attacks and he fails and you get the dominant position, whether it's like side control, I was talking to him about that. It's like you got to be ready to get into your defensive game, and if you work that, you're going to be dangerous because he's such a good attacker. And I tell people, like when we roll with like lower level belts, and even like when I roll with you, I'm like, dude, just in the first 6 months, just play the game of like, my only job is to not get tapped out. Like that's it. Just don't get tapped out.
Yeah.
And then jiu-jitsu is that weird thing where it's like, everybody's improving, so you may never feel like, unless you're like a dom that's a hyper competitor that's accelerating faster than other people, but like jiu-jitsu is like, if you stay consistent for 6 months, there's going to be someone who starts and you're 6 months ahead of them and you'll get you know what I mean? And then it's that, and then Danaher talks about that. Like sometimes you learn best by rolling with lower level belts and just being able to try different things that you couldn't try on guys that had more time than you.
Yeah. I tell the beginners all the time when they're like, man, everybody is like better than me. I go, at some point you won't be the new guy anymore. You know, at some point somebody else will come in the door and then that will be the taking place of where you were at. You know, that's your guy to train with and try out all your techniques. And that's something that I've always done with my training is, you know, I try it on lower level people and then eventually build it up. And one thing that I kind of developed, you know, later on in my game when I was probably like a purple or brown belt is that I would train with guys that were way better than me. And like, I would give them, you know, resistance, but then I would see like, oh, they're doing this one particular move over and over, you know, or they're hitting this one submission over and over. So I would then like, they tap me or whatever, we reset. My goal was to get to that position that they were doing to me and then see how they were countering it. And so I'm like, oh, that was like a free private lesson. You know, I just saved myself like $100. Yeah, I took a beating for 8 minutes or whatever, but I figured it out, you know, and that's a good way to learn something, you know, like really just watch what the other, like, don't get so caught up in doing something to this person that's better than you.
Right.
Pay attention to what they're doing to you and then like try to replicate that.
Yeah.
know?
That's a, that's good advice. I've never done that, but that's what
I think that came from training with people that were like a lot better than me and being around a bunch of guys that, you know, didn't speak the same language as me as well. You know, it's not like it was kind of, sometimes it's hard to communicate with like a Brazilian guy, you know, if you don't speak Portuguese. And I trained a lot of times in the early days of like a lot of guys in the room were, you know, Brazilian. And sometimes people were hesitant to show you like what their best move was too. And so that was an easier way for me to learn that stuff. And, you know,
that's like when in the second episode, you and Dom were talking about like showing up to a gym and not kind of like blowing your load on like, you know, just kind of playing defensively and seeing the room. And I mean, traveling as much as I do, that's always my thing is like just kind of settle back. Like don't go in there and just try to wreck a bunch of people, you know, like kind of feel the room out because I mean, you never know like what you're going to get into in different gyms.
I train with some guys when we go to Hawaii every couple of years and there's like a particular group of guys, and they're the monster sheep is like what they're called, but they're all Polynesian dudes that are way bigger than me. And I got invited to the training. It's like a private training in the back of a plumbing supply business. It's upstairs too. But it's like a nice mat area. But I had asked this one gym, like, hey man, is there any guys that like to train Nogi? And he's like, oh yeah, you need to go here. And so I show up and, you know, like everybody is like 200 plus pounds, over 6 foot, you know? And it was really good training, but everybody tried to kill me. And my only goal was like to not get tapped, you know? I like had no desire to try to tap it. I'm like vacation mode, you know, but I feel like that's good to go and do that. And now since then I go back every year and like me and the guys stay in contact with each other and they do like, they even set up special training so that I can like get more time training with them. I think that's the cool thing about jiu-jitsu is we didn't know each other at all. And because we went and trained and we had hard training and good training and everybody was cool, like now that's a friendship that's formed, you know?
Yeah, I think, and it's funny because it's like, I feel like that's some of the advice we give to the white belts, right? It's just survive, right? And like figure it out. But you know, for me, traveling and training is like a way of life for me. You know, I bring my no-gi stuff everywhere I go, all over the country. I've trained in gyms, you know, pretty much Texas to Minnesota West. I've trained in gyms, and you know, it is. I think something that, you know, going back to how you support the like go and cross train and meet people. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about jiu-jitsu for me is that like I've met so many people that are now friends, right? Like, I mean, I go to 10 Planet San Diego whenever I'm there, and Boogie like hugs me, and like
he's a good dude.
You know what I mean? Sure. And
one of my favorite people in 10 Planet.
Oh yeah, and you know, that's something I think that people in jiu-jitsu don't give it, and maybe it's because of the evolution of jiu-jitsu that it's like, people don't realize what a beautiful aspect of jiu-jitsu that is, to be able to like take it and go other places and meet other people. Because I mean, so much of the problem in the world today is everybody's siloed, right? And jiu-jitsu is a language that we can all speak, whether we don't actually speak the language or not. But yeah, that's it's interesting that you as a black belt, do you still present that technique of like just survive?
Yeah,
right?
It's true, man. I mean, there's sometimes like I don't feel my best either, like like you could eat something that like upsets your stomach, but you're like in training, you're like, oh well, it is what it is, right? And for me, the reason I like to train so much when I travel is I'm such a creature of habit that I just feel better, like mentally. I feel better, and I know my wife appreciates it too, because if there were like 4 or 5 days where I didn't train, even though I may be doing something physical because it's not my normal thing, she would say, hey, we need to like go to a gym or something. She doesn't have to say that, but I know that she wouldn't hesitate to say that. And I just, again, it's part of my routine, right? So I go train, and then we go have some dinner, and then we go to bed. Right. And I think that it's good for people to have that routine of, whether it's training jiu-jitsu or going to a gym and exercising, like it needs to be part of your routine.
Yeah. And my wife tells me all the time, I was growing up, right, 2nd grade, they were like, that kid has ADD. And when I got sober, I went through a sober living that like took everything away, right? Money, car, phone, everything. And then when I was about 3 months, I'd been taking stimulants for ADD my entire life, like from the 2nd grade until I was 26, and they forced me to get off of them. But I haven't taken anything since I got sober, and for me, jiu-jitsu is that, right? It like helps my brain chemistry, right? The physical exertion to like get the brain just to calm down and be quiet. That's like such an immense portion of jiu-jitsu for me. It goes back to the meditative thing for me. It's like, it really does like clear your mind and kind of refresh the soul type thing. And when I don't have it, I'm like itching for it. You know what I mean? But,
it makes a big difference in my life for sure. I feel before jiu-jitsu, I kind of, I'd done a lot of different things, but I didn't really have that direction of like, I'd done a lot of stuff, but never completed anything.
Yeah.
And so for me to get to black belt, it kind of had this like, mystique to it. Like, man, am I ever going to make it there? And then once I made it, it was like a weird feeling of like, now what, But I don't know if every black belt experiences that, but I know for me, if there was like a month or so where I'm like, man, I expected to have some kind of feel. I don't know what I expected, but it was like I expected to feel different than this. And once I got over that, it was more of like, okay, this is like, I don't know everything, like this is my time to really understand that all the stuff that I know is so much smaller than the stuff that I don't know. Right. So I need to start learning more. And that's really when I started watching more instructionals and doing more cross training and, inviting more people in for seminars and stuff like that.
I think you guys touched on it in the podcast, but it's the more you know, or Jean-Jacques Machado is who says it, right? The more you know, the less you use, right? And that's like the era of a black belt. Is like, I always tell people jiu-jitsu is like an upside down triangle, and it's like every belt, the triangle gets wider and wider, and when you get to black belt, and I don't know, I'm not a black belt, but I assume just based on, one of my childhood friends that, I mean, we went to elementary school together. He's a black belt under Cabrino Charles, and he's like, when I got my purple belt from you, he was like, purple belt's the best belt because you just like, you're right in the middle. You don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And he's like, when I got to black belt, it's like the depth becomes so much deeper because you roll with black belts that have been black belts for 20 years and you just don't realize how much you don't know as a black belt.
Yeah. I had an instructor early on, and being from East Texas is like a very East Texas saying. He would say the black belt only covers 2 inches of your ass and you got to cover the rest. And that is 100% true because there's, I've rolled with black belts that, like, man, we're now nowhere near the same, like you just like completely mopped the floor with me. I think like my first experience of ever feeling that way was rolling with Tanner Rice.
Oh yeah.
And I trained with him quite a bit when he was part of Soul Fighters and he was here in Texas. And I wasn't a black belt, but I was like a brown belt, and I competed a lot, and I was very close to being a black belt. I'd already like medaled at Worlds and stuff. And I rolled with him, and he just did the same thing to me for like 8 minutes. He just passed my guard the same way. And I recognized that he's doing the same thing, but I couldn't stop it. And then at the end of the round, I'm like, hey man, why didn't you like do anything different? Try to go for a sub. He's like, oh man, like I could tap everybody like as many times as I want, but like I'm not learning anything and you're not learning anything. It was like a nice way of saying you suck at jiu-jitsu. But you know,
that's how I feel rolling with Dom.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's some people like that, man. You like, all you can do at the end of it is be like, hey, that was fun. You know? I appreciate it. Thanks. You know, like
appreciate
put myself back together.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's jiu-jitsu, man.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you know, one thing you always have it in the entry of Kings and Kimura, so I figure we got some more time. We should dive into this because I haven't heard you guys talk about aliens, even though you suggest aliens.
Yeah, I mean, definitely aliens is a big part of stuff that I want to talk on. You know, obviously there's like a lot of stuff.
So let me ask you: have you ever seen the movie The Fourth Kind?
I don't think I have.
Oh, you should watch it. So it's kind of like a documentary. Mm-hmm. It's based on a true story of this. Like, she was a psychotherapist in a town in Alaska, and she started seeing people in the town that were saying they were seeing the same shit, and then she experiences it. And I won't give away the movie, but one thing when you asked me, I thought I should touch on, and you got to watch the movie because like it'll make more sense when I kind of explain this experience. But we've talked in the past where you mentioned some people that you knew who thought they had an experience, you know. So I had a buddy growing up, and it was more so like after college, I hung out with this guy a lot. And when you see the movie, so his name was Rich, and he used to multiple experiences where he would explain these kind of like strange out of body experience. He would have the night terror where he'd wake up and his body wouldn't move. Like he felt like he was being held down, and there would be a figure in the room in the corner, and he knew that he couldn't do anything and they were doing something to him. And everybody was like, all right, Rich, you probably take too many drugs. Like, it is what it is. But 2 separate occasions, one time in San Francisco, he was with his girlfriend at his girlfriend's friend's place in San Francisco. And they woke up to him on the couch in that like bone rigid, like couldn't, like he was just completely stiff. His jaw like unhinged, and he was making like an inhuman noise. And if you watch the movie, you'll understand why. Like, I think it's a alien correlation thing, but there's 2 different situations with him like that. And like, I've never really had the alien per se thing, but I think there's a lot out there. But the one thing so I've always kind of believed in aliens. I've totally believed like I mean, when you look in the 1950s and the jump post Roswell, like, you know, technologically, and when you like Bob Lazar and the story of like UFOs over Washington, D.C. and was Washington meeting with aliens. And I'm a pretty big believer in the different, like, reptilian, the Greys. There's the Nordics, right? Which I would love to meet the Nordics because they sound like the friendliest ones. But also, like, hypothetically, like, Nordics probably the most genetically, like, if you think about the Egyptians and they say like the evolutionary jump that humans made, right? It was probably the Nordics that did the genetic testing to create, quote unquote, the slaves that built Egypt. Yeah. But
I think that, you know, just to jump in for a second, the whole Egyptian thing, I personally think that what we see in Egypt was a later civilization coming in and building on top of something that already existed, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's the likelihood of them being able to build that stuff at that time period is probably not there, right? You know?
That's like the Graham Hancock idea, right? Of like catastrophic world events, and it's like civilizations get wiped out and another civilization comes in and they're like, well, this works.
Yeah,
you know?
like we can use this now for the king's chamber. Like, it doesn't really make any sense to like bury one dude in there.
It's funny too, because like the thing that leads me to the like I do believe in aliens is the unbelievable mathematical prowess of so many of those things with the stars.
Mm-hmm.
Like how could that happen?
How does everything align? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like Göbekli Tepe is like one of the places that comes to mind because they had like aligned these temples with Orion's belt, and then as the Earth shifted axis, they repositioned to a new spot. You know, so they had some kind of understanding of the way that the world turned and the way that lights were or the stars were lit up in the sky.
Right.
You know,
what do you think about these like flat earthers though? What does that do to that?
I don't know, man. The flat Earth thing is kind of crazy to me in the sense that like they are calculating, like let's take the military. They are calculating for the curvature of the Earth when they fire these giant, weapons.
Right.
And to me, that automatically says like the Earth is not flat.
Yeah.
You know?
When you talk like snipers and how they
Not
take
even
long
that.
shots.
Like if I'm thinking of let's take of like a battleship or something, when they're firing some of those weapons, they're firing miles, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like you just point this at something and you shoot. They have to calculate for all of the dropping of the shell or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So go back to your alien thing. Like I've never had any kind of experience with it. You see some like lights in the sky, but there's so many lights in the skies now. It could be drones or anything. But my dad has told me about a couple of experiences that both he and my mother had. And they lived up in Texarkana, and there's a huge military base up there. It's like there's a Red River Army Depot, and then there's a military base up there too. But he told me that whenever like he was a teen, they would have like pasture parties and they would see some lights, and this is like super redneck, but they would shoot at them. And he swears that he saw like when they would shoot at it, it would like take off. And there was one incident that my mother had where I wasn't born yet, but my sister was like maybe 3 or 4. She was getting groceries out of the back of the car, and like all of a sudden something was like above, and it sounded like a freight train. And when she looked, it was like a giant metal ship of some kind.
Right.
And my dad didn't believe her. And then the next day in the newspaper, there was like an article about it that like half the town saw it.
No.
And that was like a really weird experience because she said that like she had this feeling like something was above, and she looked and it's just like this massive metal structure. I've never like asked her about it as an adult, but I remember as a kid like asking her about it, and she didn't really like want to talk about it, but she was like, nobody wanted to believe me. And then like, sure enough, it was in the paper.
The thing too for me with the like alien thing that's like disconcerting is like you look at Project Bluebeam, and it's like, I mean, I remember in it was like Coachella 2009 or whatever when they did the Tupac hologram.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at that and being like, they can do that?
Yeah.
And like and what's the rule? It's like the technology we see and is available to the public is 10 years old because the military's been using it. And it's like that hologram is impressive.
I think it's probably further past that. When you listen to like some of like the Sean Ryan episodes, or like Rogan recently had on that lady that was a scholar in like religious studies, and she got brought in on that Bluebeam. I don't know if you heard that, but she was talking about how these people that work for the government that are on Project Bluebeam brought her in because they wanted access to the Vatican and some of these ancient records that could potentially have been some type of like, spacecraft travel. But she said that she saw, and we've heard this a lot, right? There's like a metal material that you can crumple up like a piece of paper, and then when you let go of it, it goes back into its form, and it's like a solid form. It's what like these craft were apparently built out of. But I want it to be true, but at the same time, I don't, because I think there's so many people that couldn't handle it. I don't know if I could necessarily handle it too. Like if all of a sudden now it's like I'm driving down the street and like there's reptilians, which I think would probably be the first ones that we encounter. It's not going to be the best people, right? It's going to be the people that want to take over,
right?
So
Yeah.
If that is real, I think that's what would happen. It wouldn't be a great thing.
Yeah. No, I just think it's interesting when if it happens and it's not just like we see aliens, it's like we see spacecraft, I will be very like hesitant to believe it's real after I should say, just as a caveat, before I got sober, I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist. But like looking at the Maui fires and the Project Bluebeam thing that was involved, they say was involved there, and it's like makes a lot of sense to create some chaos.
Yeah,
But I hope it works out. And the Nordics come and they appreciate your bald head and like my gray hair.
We're gonna wrap up our conversation, but we kind of covered a wide variety of stuff, and these are always fun to do for me, just because I'm gonna talk anyway and shoot the shit, so it's fun to do it with somebody else. But yeah, I appreciate you coming out, man. It's been fun like having you as a student too. One of the best things I think as an instructor that I enjoy the most are like meeting different people and like hearing their story, and everybody always has their own story, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the coolest thing about jiu-jitsu is it connects people. It doesn't mean you everybody does the same job.
Yeah. Well, I think, this podcast, I'm really happy that you started it. I've been all over the place. I've done a lot in the jiu-jitsu world and both professionally. And, the thing, like Susan talks about it, obviously, maybe she's a little bit biased because she's your wife, but, truly though, like it's really impressive who you are. And I hope I like this podcast because it gets you out there more because, I've been really, really happy to come train at Corvo, but also just because it's like the way that you kind of look at the world and what you share with your students and how you guide us. Like, I think of a pitfall in jiu-jitsu, you almost got to date your school to know if it's the right place for you, because the pitfall is there's so many bad people. Like a black belt doesn't make you a great person. Yeah. And like with you, the thing that's beautiful is like, even though my professional career is going one way, I'm very impressed with like how you treat everything you do as like a business and a profession and the personal aspect you give to it. So thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this. And,
absolutely.
I'm excited to watch Kings of Kimura take over because it's cool. It's cool for, I think one thing to take from it is that a black belt does what a white belt does.
Yeah.
That's a really cool message that poor white belts probably don't believe it, but the reality is like, that's jujitsu is jujitsu. And
yeah, I think for me, when you talk about like stuff that I do and I treat it as a profession, I look at, I read the book, like Joe Rogan talks about it all the time, and I kind of copied him in this sense of that war of art with Stephen Pressfield. It's a book about a guy that like his life was like falling apart and he couldn't figure out how to start,
Right.
I mean, he had like a lot of things going on for him, but it was like no real direction, like no sense of urgency for anything. And I think that it's, whatever you do in life, if you're willing to do it, you should do it with effort, right? It shouldn't be, you shouldn't just half-ass something.
Right.
Like I tell people all the time that want to compete, and I'm like, do you want to compete or you want to see what it's like to compete?
Right.
Because there's a big difference in, putting in the actual work to win an event, and the guy that's like, you know what, I think I'm going to jump in this tournament. Like, that's great, man. And some people can do that. I've had students that are like, don't really train that hard and they come in and they win. But like the goal should be, if you're going to do it, at least like do it well.
Yeah. No, for me, that's pretty much been the game professionally. Is like I always say I started at the back of the pack and I'm trying to hit 40 and be ahead of everybody. So it takes like hard work and dedication, and it's true in all aspects of life. And I think the beautiful thing about this podcast and you is that you get to share that message on a broader scale, because we see it in school. You know what I mean? We come and we train with you, and you give us all like, very like warming education in jiu-jitsu and like support us. But I'm excited to see this blow up on a broader scale. So
yeah,
you can keep sharing that message.
Well, we're looking for sponsors. So if you guys want to sponsor us, we're looking for sock sponsors, number one.
Yeah, you guys got lucky. These early podcasts, you get to see the feet, but eventually they're going away.
Yeah, we need those sponsorship. I'm willing to do almost anything for $1. So, all right, man, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming in, and
thank you.
You guys tune in for the next episode.
And that's a wrap for today's Kings of Kimuras episode. Thanks for joining us on this epic journey. Remember to keep training, stay curious, and always be ready for the next adventure. Until next time, keep your guards up and your minds open.